So basically, what is happening is that me and Will are gonna be extremely nerdy, and we're gonna do some stuff with A Song of Ice and Fire. We're gonna go do a bit chapter reading, analyzing prose, talking about what the characters are doing, why it's great.
Yeah. So basically, the idea is that a while ago, I had the idea for Will's A Song of Ice and Fire hour, where I got to just talk about A Song of Ice and Fire and specifically do like close readings of the text like me and Katie do during the critique streams. But I didn't really like doing it on my own. And I knew that there was another nerd on this Discord who also liked A Song of Ice and Fire. And I was like, okay, maybe I can get her to do it with me. And thus I invited Lindbergh on. Lindbergh, would you like to say very quickly what your history with the Song of Ice and Fire is?
I grew up in the 90s, where fantasy was stupid. But then I started gaming, and some of my gaming friends said that, you need to read this thing. You love blood, you love it when people die. And I said, sure, I'll read it. And this was in the early 2010s, and my life has never been the same.
Okay, all right, that's fair. My journey started. Okay, so I actually have a funny story about it, which is that initially I got the book, and for some reason I got a Game of Thrones, the first one. I didn't read it in order. I just read random chapters of it because I didn't think I was gonna like it, and so like I had a weird impression of what was going on in it. Like I remember the Arya escapes the Red Keep chapter was one I read that I remember being like, that's weird. Like, this is very high fantasy. And it's that kind of a thing. And then later I read it and it completely changed how I see fiction and like how my own writing evolved. It's been just a massive influence. And this is not to say that I don't think the series has problems. I think it has a lot of problems, and I think Lindbergh would agree. But it is one that I still love very deeply, and it's one that I think does a lot of things much better than people give it credit.
I think a lot of people bow out at the massive amounts of world building, because there is that. But also, the show has given the books a bad name. People think it's all about fucking, when it's really all about nipples.
We were saying before the stream started, for context, Lindbergh is not just obsessed with nipples, that Martin in the books has a weird thing where nipples occur more than they would in a normal book. Like, people get them cut off twice in the series, which is not a huge amount, but still more times than you would think in a series. Mm-hmm. He talks about him a little bit. It's a joke that I like to say that he's kind of, you can tell what's going on there. But today's chapter, I don't think has any nipples involved. We are going to be looking at Sam's chapter in A Storm of Swords, the first chapter, where there's the battle at the Fist of the First Men. And I had run across this chapter because me and Lindbergh had been talking about doing this for a bit, and we'd jotted down like different ideas. And then for the last critique stream, me and Katie, I was trying to look at action scenes that were good, and I was reading through some of these, and like I had forgotten how really evocative and horror, like battle horror this chapter is, and so I was like, okay, let's do this first. Lindbergh has taken notes because she is an academic. I have not because I am lazy. Is that accurate?
Yes. Let's go with that.
Okay, all right. So I will switch over to A Storm of Swords. Oh, I need to share this on my screen. I forgot.
Yes, you do.
Right. Lindbergh is being a dinosaur and only has access to the
books on paper.
Yeah, the paper books, which is frankly just like, what are we even doing here?
I am but a poor Swedish peasant. We read books on paper over here.
Well, they don't have access to more. I've talked about starting a spin-off podcast with Lindbergh called Unresolved, A Song of Ice and Fire, which actually is sadly very accurate.
Yes. I actually got a bit depressed at that suggestion.
He's not going to finish it before he dies, and that's actually really sad.
Yeah, let's just accept it and grieve and move on with our lives.
I remember being in college and reading a Dance of Dragons and being like, okay, we only got to wait a couple more years. And that was close to 10 or 12 years ago now, I think. Um, okay, so did you have any notes you want to start, or do you want to just go over those as we run into them in the chapter?
I have actually not taken notes on this chapter, so let's just dive right in.
Oh, so we see the truth now. Someone isn't actually an academic. Somebody is going to get replaced. Okay.
This just isn't one of my chapters, so I do think it's rather great.
Okay, and so for the background in this chapter, this is, if you don't know the show, you're not going to really know, or the books or the show, you're not really going to understand too much of the context. But basically, there's a guy in a organization called the Night's Watch. He is in the far north. They have set up this encampment to stop some barbarian people, but they're going to get attacked by undead people. And this is like the first time we've seen these undead people, the White Walkers, and the Whites, in like a real battle. And we start not at that battle, but here. Sobbing, Sam took another step. This is the last one, the very last. I can't go on. I can't. But his feet moved again, one and then the other. They took a step and then another, and he thought, they're not my feet. They're someone else's. Someone else is walking. It can't be me. So right off the bat, I like this as an opening paragraph because it gets to kind of what is the word I am looking for? The distanced mindset that he's in that this is like very far away from him, like explicitly. I also think that this is a thing Martin does a lot in this book, is that he will start with something happening after the event that he then wants to flash back to. And I think he does this because the books are so long that often you can't quite remember what happened the last chapter, so he almost always needs to recap things a little bit.
Yes,
and it allows like a mini recap. Yeah, and it also allows him to get away with not having to fully form a lot of scenes. He can just kind of recap them, and then some of the more logistical, how do the character get from here to there, he can just skip over, and thoughts. This chapter is actually very similar to a Varamir chapter that I looked at, which I think was quite good. Any thoughts you have on this first paragraph?
I want to say that at the start of A Storm and Swords, we get a prologue where Sam is before the battle. It's not from Sam's perspective, but basically the last thing we saw of Sam was that they were blowing the horns and warning the Night's Watch that they had enemies approaching. So starting this chapter with this rather simple but also rather evocative line really highlights that something has gone badly wrong in the battle. So I think it works.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. The prologue was like, and then the horns were blasting for the White Walkers coming, and I thought that was like
they blow the horn once, which is Rangers returning. They blow the horn twice, which is wildlings attacking. And then comes the third blast, the fateful blast, a blast that has not been heard in 8,000 years, that warns of the others. And that's the last we see. And now we meet Sam again, just stumbling through. And in some sort of, I don't want to say hysteria, but he's in emotional extremity.
So British. Limburg is not British, guys, but she is Swedish. Okay, yeah, no, I think that's a really good point. It sets up an immediate tension and mystery to things. All right, you want to read the next part?
Sure. When he looked down, he could see them stumbling through the snow, shapeless things and clumsy. His boots had been black, he seemed to remember, but now the snow had caked around them, and now they were misshapen white balls, like two club feet made of ice. It would not stop.
Again, I would just like to say Martin is really good with imagery. Caked around them, now they were misshapen white balls like two club feet made of ice. Very evocative. Mm-hmm. And it's also like a nice little detail to prove that, like, oh, we're actually in this scene. He didn't just say, and his feet were cold.
No, and also it's sort of a callback to how cold it is, because snow doesn't really stick to feet until you've been out for a long time, and the warmth of your feet has sort of melted it, so it cakes around your feet.
Yeah, I think so. From Sweden, you would know. So you can let us know if this is all
I have
accurate.
a PhD in snow and misery.
Okay, go ahead and read the next part, and I'll move the page when we get there.
Okay. It would not stop, the snow. The drifts were up past his knees, and crust covered his lower legs like a pair of white greaves. His steps were dragging, lurching. The heavy pack he carried made him look like some monstrous hunchback. And he was tired, so tired. I can't go on. Mother have mercy, I can't. Every fourth or fifth step he had taken, he had to reach down and tug up his sword belt. He had lost the sword on the fist, but the scabbard still weighed down the belt. He did have 2 knives, the dragon-glass dagger John had given him, and the steel one he cut his meat with. All that weight, dragged, heavy, and his belly was so big and round that he forgot to tug. The belt slipped right off and tangled around his ankles, no matter how tight he cinched it. He had tried belting it above his belly once, but then it came almost to his armpits. Gren had laughed himself sick at the sight of it, and Dolores had said, "What? I knew a man once wore his sword on a chain around his neck like that. One day he stumbled, and the hilt went up his nose."
Okay, so I want to just let everyone know, I didn't realize we were going to be getting such a verbal presentation today, but that was quite nice. All this is good stuff to give you a sense of the scene. Again, there's an underlying mystery, and attention, so none of this feels boring. You're still intrigued by what's going on. Also, he did have 2 knives, the dragon glass dagger John had given him, the steel one he cut his meat with. That is a Chekhov's gun, or a Chekhov's dragon glass gun, as they would say, because that will go off by the end of the chapter. This is just also a thing Martin does a lot, is he'll refer back to other, almost little flashback scenes. When somebody is thinking certain things. He does this quite a lot, and it gives us a strong sense, I think, of the interaction between the characters.
Yes, and also that his mind is sort of drifting. He's kind of disassociating from this situation he is in right now. So he's remembering something that, it's kind of a memory that is triggered by this thing he's struggling with right now, and the memory isn't entirely relevant, but that's just how thoughts go. It's a very organic sense of mind seeking out associations.
Yeah, that's something Martin does a lot. He did a lot in that Varamir chapter as well, and I think it's one of the things that makes the mind state of his characters feel very real, is that you do have this kind of a realistic and organic flow of thoughts from one to another, so it's easy to kind of feel like you are there with the characters. Yes. Okay, and then so because we just don't have time to get through all of it, we have more of Sam being like, "Oh, life sucks right now," and then he says, "But if he stopped, he died. He knew that. They all knew that. The few who were left. They had been 50 when they fled the fist, maybe more, but some wandered off in the snow. A few wounded had bled to death, and sometimes Sam heard shouts behind him from the rear guard, and once an awful scream. When he heard that, he had run 20 yards or 30, as fast and as far as he could, his half-frozen feet kicking up the snow. He would be running still if his legs were stronger. They are behind us. They are still behind us. They are taking us one by one." This is really nicely creepy. Because we don't even see the monster. We don't even quite know what's going on. We just, he can hear it around him. There's other senses besides sight being used, which is nice.
Mm-hmm. We break the train of thought he had in the previous paragraph, and then we just sort of snap to, if he stops, he dies. It's very tart, and it's very pointed, sort of.
Yeah. Alright guys, I don't know how to mute my thing for this, so you guys are gonna just have to deal with me clearing my throat. Yeah. Well, and also notice he does the thing of long sentence, short sentence for emphasis. Okay, so what I want to do is more or less skip to where he starts thinking about things in terms of the battle, because battle is more what I wanted to look at. This is all very good. It builds the scene. Blah blah blah. Oh yeah, Sam has self-esteem issues, weak and fat, and though he could barely his own weight, the mail was too much for him. He felt as though it was rubbing his shoulders raw despite the layers of cloth and quilt. That's good stuff.
Yeah, and I just want to sort of, because Sam is rather fat, and other people are prejudiced against him because he is, and he himself sort of, he's very hard and down on himself. But if we parallel that to some other books, it doesn't actually feel like Martin is prejudiced against Sam. It doesn't feel like he's saying that, being fat is disgusting, it's ugly. Like, he talks about how it affects Sam in his life.
Yeah, I mean, that is a really good
I really
point.
appreciate that.
And I think something that I don't want to say it comes from Martin being fat himself, but I do kind of think it's that, in that he has a lot of sympathy for Sam, in that, Sam, again, he himself sees himself as gross. One of those infamous lines from the series is when he's talking about like his erection and stuff, and he calls it a fat pink mast, and people have been like, "Oh my God, Martin's so bad at writing sex scenes," but that's not really what it is. That is a reflection of his self-esteem issues, but other characters don't really necessarily think of him as fat. Well, the characters we're supposed to identify with, like John, for example, don't think of him as gross fat, and yeah, so there's a lot of sympathy there, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Hold on, I'm trying to figure out why my recording just stopped.
Yes, Hope. Sam has so much self-loathing, and the books does a very good job of showing you how this self-esteem was first built up a little bit as a child, and then when he started, being seen as this boy who was going to be the new lord, everything in his life just broke him down more and more and more. So he's essentially at his lowest point when he comes to the wall. And with his appointment with Master Aemon, he gets a bit meat on his bones. Like, he is useful. He likes being useful. And then, they take him out here and do this to him, and it's such a great character moment, because we've seen Sam carefully sort of thrive, and immediately something just comes and just shoves his feet out from under him.
Let's get to the actual battle part.
Down to Maslin screamed for mercy, I think it starts with.
Maslin screamed for... you go ahead and read it, because you have such a beautiful voice.
Okay. Maslin screamed for mercy. Why hadn't he suddenly remembered that? It was nothing he wanted to remember. The man had stumbled backwards, dropping his sword, pleading, yielding, even yanking off his thick black glove and thrusting it up before him as if it were a gauntlet. He was still shrieking for quarter as the wight lifted him up into the air by the throat and near ripped the head off of him. The dead have no mercy left in them. And the others? No, I mustn't think of that. Don't think, don't remember, just walk, just walk, just walk. Sobbing, he took another step.
Okay, so this is actually... If you pause for a second, this is actually kind of a really nice character detail, is that he took off his thick black glove and thrust it up before he gauntlet. So, like, this doesn't make sense in anything but a medieval setting, so it helps you understand the setting, but it also adds a layer of unreality and hysteria to things, and that this guy was so mentally broken that he
was trying to yield. He was trying to yield to this dead thing.
Yeah, to a zombie.
That very obviously was not going to stop. But it was the last resort, I am going to die, I'm in extremity.
Well, and also just
sort of lizard brain.
Exactly. Like, this is just the script he's been handed, and so he's going to continue to carry it out, even as it doesn't actually make a lot of sense. Which I think is like...
also, it's a very nice mirror as well, because Sam is on the outside, he's seeing this, and he's perceiving the full horror of it.
Yeah, I think so, and I also think that throughout the books, Martin is trying to make an argument about chivalry, and how it's not great when you're just paying attention to you know, the um, the aesthetics of it and the pomp and ceremony of it, but there is a true core of chivalry that's really valuable, that has to be kind of
Hmm.
unlocked. That's like Brienne's whole arc, and so here I think he's just reinforcing the idea of like, okay, well this view of chivalry is not applicable here when you're fighting a zombie. You can't ask for quarter.
No,
Um,
there's so much posturing to our idea of chivalry that just does not always work in a real setting. Like he's juxtaposing the idea of chivalry against the harsh reality of it in a way that's really interesting.
yeah, I really like it. I think it's very he's doing a lot with just one paragraph. And notice also this is actually very good world building, you know? Like this is a nice way of getting world building in there that because a lot of people I know struggle with world building as in their books and in their work, and this is a nice way of just kind of slipping it in.
In a
Let's
sense, though, it's a little bit of a thorny detail because there are readers whose heads this will just go right over. But that's it with all sorts of world building, and you can't expect the reader to catch everything.
Yeah, I think that's true, and that's why you kind of have to reiterate things sometimes. But this is like a good fourth of the way through the book, I think, and also the third book in the series. So, can you
Yes,
believe this came
and
out
for
more than
those,
20 like years ago now?
don't talk about it. We'll just pretend it's a somewhat new book, and he's released two after that. He's right on track. Everything's going great.
Okay, all right. They've already gotten a TV show out of the way.
Ugh. Yeah.
Sam is still depressed about it being cold. Hundreds had died on the fist. They had died all around him, and more had died after it, and he'd seen them. Shivering, Sam released his grip on the tree and eased himself down into the snow. It was cold and wet, he knew, but he could scarcely feel it through all his clothing. He stared upward at the pale white sky as snowflakes drifted down upon his stomach and his chest and his eyelids, and all this. And so this is actually kind of a nice break point where it's like, okay, Sam has reached this moment where he can't go on. So now, as we shift to thinking back on the battle, you aren't like, okay, but what happened next? You're not impatient. You want to know what happened. And also, there's been so much buildup. That's one of the things that makes this battle so creepy is that like we see the aftermath of it before we ever get to it. Like it's building tension and anticipation. Um,
And me personally, I really like his thoughts here because the I died a man of the night's watch. I did my duty. Like for him, it is very important because his father has basically said that you are no man. You are not a man. You're a pig. You're gonna go to the night's watch. And you can just see how this drives Sam, even when he's terrified, even when he's had its darkest hour. His father's voice is just like ringing in his head and just sort of like a fire in his brain, urging him on. Like, I died a man of the night's watch. That's all he wants now. He just wants to die a decent person. I think
yeah,
that's
and
really, strong.
there's something both heartwarming and pathetic at once about the fact that he's like, this is not such a huge duty in certain ways, so it feels a little bit hysterical is again not quite the right word, but close. But also, it's like this: he had one job and he did his one job, and he can be proud of that. And in the thesis of the books, that actually is quite a lot. That is quite valuable, even if it wasn't a heroic job. It was a job, and he got it done, and that was important. And it's a good way of then going into like framing the Ravens had been his responsibility. Um, let's see. Oh, okay. And so then this part is the Lord Commander basically says like, "Hey, you're no fighter. We both know that, boy. If it happens when we're attacked, don't go trying to prove otherwise. You'll just get in the way. You're to send a message, and don't come running to ask what the letter should say. Write it out yourself, and send one bird to Castle Black and another to the Shadow Tower." The old bear pointed a gloved finger right in Sam's face. "I don't care if you're so scared you foul your breeches, and I don't care if thousands of wildlings are coming over the walls howling for your blood. Get those birds off, or I swear I'll hunt you through all seven hells and make you damn sorry that you didn't." And Mormont's own raven had bobbed his head up and down and croaked, "Sorry, sorry, sorry." Um, And this is also a good thing in that, like, a lot of people don't like Sam because he's fat and not good at fighting. But Mormont is very like, no, we both know that, but you still have a really important job to do, which is
Hmm.
nice. Mormont is
And
very,
since most people can't even write, most people on the wall can't write, so Sam is quite valuable, even if he's fat and slow.
yeah, that's actually a good point. That's something that's kind of a little underrated.
Yeah, he is doing something very few other people could do. Like Mormont could do it, but he's obviously going to be leading the fight.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's got other things. Everybody has a job here, and Mormont is a bit like
Yeah,
John in that they're both very, recently.
pragmatic.
They're very pragmatic, but there's also a sense to which they know what person is best for what job. Much like Tornaga-sama in Shogun, who says that, some birds are good for certain kinds of hunting and others are for others, and he makes that metaphor for people. John and
Hmm.
Mormont are both quite, almost a little dispassionate in how they view other people at times and what uses they have, and they're not really blinded by societal expectations of how much value a person has.
Yeah, for me, that is the essence of pragmatism. Like, you see where you can use, you have these resources and you see where you can put them to use, regardless of your personal feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And that's just not
They
something a lot
see
of.
opportunity in people.
Yeah, and that's not something a lot of the more like bigoted characters in the book can actually really manage. Um,
No, you could also argue it might be because of their upbringings. Like Mormont was a lord of Bear Island, and John has had a more intellectual, less practical upbringing.
yeah, and the argument I think also with John is that since he is not valued in certain ways, he's able to see that in others. I once read
Hmm.
a meta talking about how John actually has a very specific MO of he comes into a new situation, makes friends with people who are disadvantaged in that situation but still useful, and then it creates a clique of power out of them. And he may not consciously be doing this or as like calculatingly as that sounds, but that is something he actually does several times throughout the
Yes.
books.
Yeah, he gains true loyalty, the loyalty where people will die for him.
Yeah, exactly. Out of like these people who otherwise are disenfranchised somewhat.
Yes.
Okay, Sam was sorry. Sorry he hadn't been braver or stronger or good with swords. That he hadn't been a better son to his father and a better brother to Dickon and the girls. He was sorry to die, too. But better men had died on the fist, good men and true, not squeaking fat boys like him. At least he would not have the old bear haunting him through hell, though. I got the birds off. I did that right, at least. He had written out the messages ahead of time, short messages and simple, telling them to attack on the fist of the first men. And then he had tucked them away safe in his parchment pouch, hoping he would never need to send them. And then, yeah, what's nice about that also is like the focus on one job kind of plays into the like, when you're under stress, your higher brain functions shut down, and so this kind of nicely reflects that like, oh, he had one job and he just focused on that.
Hmm. I'm also a writer who gets kind of stuck with the logistics of things. So I really appreciate this all. You know, it's going to be hectic during the battle. Sam writes out the messages ahead of time, and then he can just cherry pick the one that suits the situation best and send it off. Like, he's smart.
Yeah, and I think by focusing on someone who isn't in the midst of the battle, as we'll see, it makes it creepier because he's getting a lot of his information secondhand. So again, the monster is always scariest when you can't see it, and also it speaks to
Hmm.
the unheroic nature of this battle. This is not like a cool battle. This is a bunch of people being slaughtered in the woods against an enemy they didn't even really know could happen. Um,
Hmm.
you go ahead and read the next part.
Let's see.
I
When
have
the
it
horns
highlighted
blew,
on screen
Sam.
if you need to see it.
I know, but I don't like reading off screens. When the horns blew, Sam had been sleeping. He thought he was dreaming them at first, but then he opened his eyes and the snow was falling on the camp, and the Black Brothers were grabbing bows and spears and running towards the ring wall. Chet was the only one nearby, Maester Raymond's old steward, with a face full of boils and the big wen on his neck. Sam had never seen so much fear on a man's face as he saw on Chet's when that third blast came moaning through the trees. "Help me get the birds off," he pleaded, but the other steward had run off, dagger in hand. He had the dogs to care for, Sam remembered. Probably the Lord Commander had given him some orders as well.
This is, you guys don't know this because you don't remember the prologue, but Chet, at this point, we were in his head, and he was about to kill. They were about to
Yeah.
enact a coup against Mormont so that they could go home. So it's like a nice little thing for the readers to be like, oh no, that's not what was happening. We know what was happening.
Yes, and
Readers,
Chet especially wants to kill Sam. That's why he has his dagger. Like, he has a grudge against Sam because Sam took his place with the stewards. Chet used to be the Raven Tender, but Chet can't read.
oh, and actually, you know what's
So
clever here
basically,
is, yeah,
Sam just dodged death, and instead of, saying like, "Oh, what's he doing with the knife?" he just assumes Chet was doing something noble, and that he
Yeah.
runs off to fight.
Or he
when
just
Chet
pulled
really
out the
runs off to
dagger.
flee.
Yeah, or he just
Yeah.
pulled out the dagger here because you notice that he didn't mention it before in the paragraph. So that's very clever. Again, Martin is very clever when it comes to those things, like hiding little Easter eggs in the books. Easter in the United States is a holiday we have, and eggs are what you find on Easter. Just to give you
Are
some
you
cultural context.
explaining for the Swede?
Yes. And sometimes I think this kind of hurts the books, or it doesn't hurt the books, but sometimes it makes certain things in the book less clear. Like Renly being gay is like really an Easter egg because Martin likes putting those in, but maybe the book would have been able to examine more gay themes if it had just been explicit. But I think it's also just one of the things that makes the book so much fun. And so much fun for readers because there is a real reward for paying attention.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a bit of a purview of the gayness at some
The
point.
gays.
The gays and the bis.
His fingers had been so stiff and clumsy in the gloves, and he was shaking from fear and cold, but he found the parchment pouch and dug out the messages he'd written. The ravens were shrieking furiously, and when he opened the castle black cage, one of them flew right in his face. Two more escaped before Sam could catch one, and when he did, it pecked him through his glove, drawing blood. Yet somehow he held on long enough to attach the little roll of parchment. The war horn had fallen silent by then, but the fist rang with shouted commands and the clatter of steel. "Fly," Sam called as he tossed the raven into the air. Very good, because again, everything is going to shit immediately. The ravens are just like not handling this well, and that adds to the panic of the situation. And again, this was a difficult job, and he did it.
Yeah, and I really like writing battle scenes. It's just a very dramatic moment, and I really like these highlighted sentences because they give this sort of fisheye view of a battle starting up. Like, there's exteriority here. The war horns have gone silent, but the fists ring with shouted commands and the clatter of steel. Like, you can sort of picture it in the background.
Very much
just
so.
starting up.
And again, we'll see that sound is used quite a lot in this chapter, to give a sense of like something going on that he doesn't quite understand. The birds in the Shadow Tower cages were screaming and fluttering about so madly that he was afraid to open the door, but he made himself do it anyway. This time he caught the first raven that tried to escape. A moment later it was clawing its way up through the falling snow, bearing word of the attack. Alright, you go and read this part.
His duty done, he finished dressing with clumsy, frightened fingers, donning his cap and surcoat and hooded cloak, and buckling his sword belt, buckling it real tight so it wouldn't fall down. When he fought his pack and stuffed all his things inside, spare small clothes and dry socks, the dragon glass arrowheads and spearhead John had given him, and the all horn too, the parchment, inks and quills, and the maps he had been drawing, and rock-hard garlic sausage he'd been saving since the war. He tied it all up and shouldered the pack onto his back. The Lord Commander said I wasn't to rush to the ring wall, he recalled. But he said I shouldn't come running to him either. Sam took a deep breath and realized he did not know what to do next.
Again, very cool. There's an attention to detail here that really sets it up and builds the tension because we're still like, oh shit, they're being attacked. What's going to happen next?
Yes, in a sense, though, I think this is where Martin runs into the sort of bloating of all his manuscripts. He loves adding detail to sort of, really build it up. So, like, he gives us a long, harangue about every single thing Sam is stuffing into his pack, when, let's be fair, a little shorter would have sufficed.
Okay, alright, fair enough. Yeah, Martin has talked before about how he likes to sweat out chapters after he's written them, of just trying to cut out absolutely everything he doesn't need. And theoretically speaking, yeah, he has already really achieved. The thing about it is that through up until this point, he's already achieved Sam's kind of single-mindedness and his sense of panic at this moment, and the attention to detail that sets this as a real scene. And so he doesn't actually need to set that stuff up more, because in the reader's brain, the scene is already like that, and they're going to contextualize new details into that framework.
Yes, and like the dragon glass arrowheads and the dagger, they serve a purpose. But what purpose does Sam Smallclothes serve?
Well, I mean, I think it's to, again, show the kind of mundanity of what's going on. But I think he could probably just have cut to... then he found his pack and stuffed all his things inside. Sam took a deep breath and realized he did not know what to do next. That kind of a thing. You could probably cut it down to that if you needed to. I think for most writers, this wouldn't be a problem, but I think when you're writing books that are door stoppers...
It is Martin. Yeah, it is Martin. His books are like 900 pages long, all of them, and it's actually more. And he's running into the problem where he just can't finish his own books because there's too much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so, at that point, you just start cutting things.
Yeah, with that in mind.
Yeah, no, I actually, that's a good point, I think. I think it's something that, again, has to do with kind of, for writers. I always like to frame literary review in terms of, like, what you can learn as a writer, and I especially like doing that kind of here. And I think that's something to learn, is that this is not bad, this is good, but it's not fully necessary. Sometimes this happens when I'm video editing. I will kind of notice if somebody has said something in the video twice, and I'll be like, okay, well, you don't actually need to say it again. You've already created the point. So I need to pick one of these two can stay, and it's the one that's like better explained, or the one that's a little funnier, or something like that. A lot of video editing is weirdly like essay writing. And so like this is kind of like that. Like we don't need another round down of what's going on in the scene, of the details.
No, it feels a little bit like a transport to what's going to happen next.
Yeah. All right, go ahead. I'll read this part. He remembered turning in a circle, lost, the fear growing inside him as it always did. There were dogs barking and horses trumpeting, but the snow muffled the sounds and made them seem far away. Sam could see nothing beyond 3 yards, not even the torches burning along the low stone wall that ringed the crown of the hill. Could the torches have gone out? That was too scary to think about. The horns blew thrice. 3 long blasts means others. The White Walkers of the woods, the cold shadows, the monsters of the tales that had made him squeak and tremble as a boy, riding their giant ice spiders, hungry for blood. Again, now that you say it, like, this is good, but it's also not fully necessary. It kind of reminds me... You go ahead.
Yeah, like, if the person read the prologue a really long time ago, reminding them of the 3 horn blasts is, feasible. But I also think that we are just sort of treading water a little bit. And, the books have done quite a lot up until this point, building the others as this great, scary thing. I don't actually feel that this whole... hungry for blood, I don't feel like it adds to their terror. Yeah, but it is also Sam's thoughts. Well, I mean, I probably have tried to condense it a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I think, again, that speaks to the way Martin writes, and that, like, so, for example, you see this a lot in Feast Dance, of, like, he can't just write, Tyrion left whatever free city he was in, and then he got to Meereen. He has to write the whole journey because he feels like it would be like cheap if they just transported. And yes, but also like the story kind of needs it. So like he likes to have this interstitial tissue, which is nice, but you kind of got to pick your battles when you're writing epics.
Yes, exactly. And considering, for example, Feast Dance, like considering that Tyrion is shit drunk for the entire journey, like that is a perfect excuse to just, wrap it up a little bit.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and just kind of get there. And like, it's not bad, but it's just not, we kind of need to hurry it along.
No, I'm already terrified of the others. I know how monumental this is and how terrible it is that they've showed up now. So Just hurry along.
I think the only really important details were like I actually think this is pretty okay to keep because it also gives a sense of like, oh, okay, he can't see a lot. There's environmental
Yeah.
details and sound details.
Yes.
Awkwardly, he drew his sword and plodded heavily through the snow, holding it. A dog ran past, barking, and he saw some of the men from the Shadow Tower, big, bearded men with long axes and 8-foot spears. He felt safer for their company, so he followed them to the wall. When he saw the torches still burning atop the rings of stones, a shudder of relief went through him. You go and read the next part.
Okay. The Black Brothers stood with swords and spears in hand, watching the snowfall, waiting. Sir Malador Locke went by on his horse, wearing a snow-speckled helm. Sam stood well back behind the others, looking for Gren and Dolorous Ed. If I have to die, let me die beside my friends, he remembered thinking. But all the men around him were strangers. Shadow Tower men under the command of the ranger named Blaine. Here they come, he heard the brothers say. Notch, said Blaine, and 20 black arrows were pulled from as many quivers and notched to as many bowstrings. Gods be good, there are hundreds, a voice said softly. Draw, Blaine said, and then hold. Sam could not see and did not want to see. The men of the Night's Watch stood behind their torches, waiting with arrows pulled back to their ears as something came up that dark, slippery slope through the snow. Hold, Blaine said again. Hold, and then loose! The arrows whispered as they flew.
Okay, so this section is quite good, but it contains one of my biggest pet
I know
peeves,
what you're gonna say.
which is that this is how riflemen work during the Napoleonic Wars. This is not how archers work. It makes no sense for them to ever hold when they're pulling a bow, unless they absolutely need to. The reason you do that, you do the shooting in order, is because rifles kind of take a long time to reload, so you want to make sure everybody hits when somebody is in range, and you want to make sure they hit all at once because that's a big morale hit. You essentially deal very high morale damage doing it that way. And then also, if you're doing like a rotating line of riflemen or whatever, like you need everybody to function as one. Here, they could just shoot. At least he says
they
loose
need
and
to
not
just
fire.
shoot.
Yeah, like in 30 seconds, you can loose like 3 arrows. There's no reason to do this whole long thing.
But also, have you ever drawn a bow? Do you know how much strength it takes to hold? Like, you're just wasting your energy, and energy is precious to these people because they have limited supplies. They have probably been, getting by on rations. They're not at their full strength. But, as scenes go, I think this is excellent.
Oh, it's so great. I mean, first off, the interjection
Suspend your belief. Suspend your disbelief, but...
Well, what happens is, what's really nice is there's the firing drill, right? But in between them, we get Here They Come, Gods Be Good, a voice said softly, or Gods Be Good, there's hundreds. And those are like nice little panicky interjections.
Yes.
And you can almost see it in like a visual language of the camera cutting to them and then back to the guy.
Yeah.
And then
it is more effective to have someone like sort of gasp, oh, there's hundreds, than to say, oh, there were hundreds of them. They were crawling up the hill. They looked like, a mass of ants or something.
Yeah, exactly. And again, that goes a lot to what this chapter does, which is it hides visually what's going on. Even here, as something came up that dark, slippery slope through the snow. It's very good, but again, this is not how arrows work, guys. This is not how archers work.
We know. You have read history, and it ruined all the books for you.
Again, these are not compound bows. You can't hold them. The arrows whispered.
I think he knows how it works, but he just disregards it for drama, and I support that decision.
I don't know, because this was written like almost 20 years ago now, I think, or something insane. And so that was really before the internet, so he may just not have known. I tend to actually be more forgiving of fantasy authors who make historically inaccurate claims before the advent of the internet, because like what, unless you're a medievalist in the way that like Tolkien was, you're just not going to know some of these details. Like Tolkien was an Anglo-Saxon scholar, and so he kind of knows how they fight and stuff like that. But most people are just like, well, it kind of looks good, and I watched a movie with it once.
Yeah, but Martin obviously knows quite a lot about the time period.
He says
I
he
think.
does. I don't know if he does.
Mm.
Okay, go ahead and read the next part.
A ragged cheer went up from the men along the ring wall, but it died quietly. "They're not stopping, my lord," a man said to Blaine, and another shouted, "Mar, look there, coming from the trees." And yet another said, "God's have mercy, they're crawling. They're almost here, they're on us." And Sam had been backing away by then, shaking like the last leaf on a tree when the wind kicks up, as much from cold as from fear. It had been very cold that night, even colder than now. The snow feels almost warm. I feel better now. A little rest, it's all I needed. Maybe a little while I'll be strong enough to walk again. In a little while.
Okay, so a couple nice things. One, Sam had been backing away by then. Again, this emphasizes that he is not in control of his body. He is almost passive in it. Um, uh, as much from cold as from fear. And then again, this is something Martin does a lot. He uses dialogue really well to build scenes in a way that, and dialogue has a way of is like the dialogue is weird in prose because it is the only thing that has exact versatilitude. It is the only like what do they mean? What's the word when music is in the scene but you're also hearing it? I don't remember. There's a word for it where like the characters can hear the music versus like a musical where the characters theoretically aren't hearing music.
Colloquial, diegetic.
Diegetic, thank you. Who said that? Thank you, Quill with no ink. Okay, yeah, no, diegetic. And so, like, dialogue is the only thing that's actually diegetic in prose. And so it's often a very good way of grounding and making a scene feel real is to have people talking. And again, you can't really see what's going on. They can see, and that's scarier.
Yes, I really love the hopping from they're not stopping to look, there's more coming, and there's a very clear build up. Like every little line of dialogue builds the tension, and then we get Sam reacting to it, from his perspective of being kind of helpless.
Yeah,
it's so fantastic.
And also, this is a very nice transition. Even colder than now. The snow almost feels warm. I feel better now. A little rest was all I needed. And then he transitioned to a horse stabbed past his head. So now we're back with Sam in the present. And that's like kind of a nice way of... It's interesting because you would think it breaks the tension, but... Oh, damn it, my computer froze again.
It feels the sort of fluidity of memory where your mind sort of drifts between events in a place that essentially has no time. Like, memory is infinite. And that is really reflected in this text because effortlessly we jump from the past to the present and they sort of bleed together.
Yeah, exactly. And it's very much something where there's a graceful back and forth. That's something I remember with Varamir's chapter as well. Okay, and so then there's a bunch of like him thinking about stuff for 2 paragraphs, and then he had heard his father tell his mother as much 100 times. The old bear knew it too. Fire arrows, the Lord Commander roared that night on the fist. So there's not a direct transition like there was last time, but there's a kind of like, oh, okay, we're on to a new topic. He's now going back to this topic, so it doesn't feel completely janky in terms of the transitions.
No, that's a bleed over. That's actually quite a good technique if you want to write this sort of jumping between past and present. Just make sure that the one bleeds into the other, and it'll feel organic. Readers will just go along with it.
Yeah, exactly. And the readers will be like, oh, okay, I got it. And again, it feels slightly disjointed, which is, fair for this chapter. It feels
disjointed, but we also feel like we're in on it. We know what's happening. We get it.
Yeah. Also, I like give them flame. I don't know why that's as dialogue. That's just like a cool way to phrase it. It was then he noticed Sam there, quaking. Charlie, get out of here. Your place is with the ravens. I got the messages away. Good. On Mormon's shoulder, his raven echoed. Good, good. The Lord Commander looked huge in his fur and mail. Behind his black visor, his eyes were fierce. It's actually kind of interesting because even he seems a little bit scary and inhuman in this moment. And I think that just helps build the sense that Sam is totally lost in this environment. He's not even really with his brothers, as he said. He's with the Shadow Tower men. So he is
strangers.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that makes this feel more like military horror than just like military fiction. Is that he's not really, he's part of the military here, but he's not really. He doesn't have that sense of band of brothersness.
No, and also he is very afraid of the Lord Commander. That is why in Sam's perspective, the Lord Commander always looks a bit scarier than he is in, for example, John's point of view. And that is also a really clever narrative trick that, you know, you might take with you, that the character's relationship with the person they are interacting with does affect how that person seems to them.
Yeah, that's very true. Because, in John's chapters, the Lord Commander always seems a little bit curmudgeonly, and in Sam's chapters, he just seems outright, like, scary and a little mean, almost.
Like, you can just tell, like Clegane.
Yeah, Sam just cannot handle necessarily that kind of that kind of roughness with who he is. But you can also, it's also a good way of creating a sense that this is how the character sees it, not the author. And we've talked about that in the past and how people have trouble with that.
Portrayal is not endorsement.
Exactly, and this is a good way of showing that, like, hey, different people see things different ways. You're in the way here. Go back to your cages. If I need to send another message, I don't want to have to find you first. See that the birds are ready. He did not wait for a response, but turned his horse and trotted around the ring, shouting, "Fire! Give them fire!" Sam did not need to be told twice. He went back to his birds as fast as his fat legs could carry him. I should write the messages ahead of time, he thought, so we can get the birds away as fast as need be. It took him longer than it should have to light his little fire, to warm the frozen ink. He sat beside it on a rock with a quill and parchment and wrote his message. This is a really nice little detail. It doesn't take up a lot of time. He has to warm the frozen ink, and that's just not a thing you would think unless you knew how ink worked in medieval times. Like that's just a nice little touch there.
And it harkens back to how cold it is, because it's kind of reminding us that, you know, this is freezing. Like, a lot of people don't know true cold. Like, ink freezing cold.
So, true story, guys. I grew up in Florida, and I've always lived here. And so, intellectually, I understand people can freeze to death. But in my gut, I'm always like, well, just put on a sweater. Like, how it's not going to kill you. Like, in my gut, don't quite understand how people freeze and die. Again, intellectually I understand it, but in my gut, I don't really. And so this kind of helps, like, put you in the mindset where I might have just been like, well, it's just cold. Like, what does that mean? You know?
Yeah, this is step into your freezer and sit down cold.
Yeah, it's just a bitter, bitter cold. All right, you read the next part, because I actually really love how he does these next 3 paragraphs. Attacked.
Attacked amidst snow and cold, but we've thrown them back with fire arrows, he wrote, as he heard Thorin Smallwood's voice ring out with the command of "Notch! Draw! Loose!" The flight of arrows made a sound as sweet as a mother's prayer. "Burn, you dead bastards, burn!" Daiwon sang out, cackling. The brothers cheered and cursed. "All safe," he wrote. "We remain on the fist of the first men." Sam hoped there were better archers than him.
Saying out cackling, that's a nice, again, a little bit, we see the use of, like, we can't see them, we can hear the dialogue. Cackling is, again, a nice way of showing the hysteria and panic of the moment a little bit. And then Sam hoped they were better archers than him. Again, he has self-esteem issues. And what I really like about this is how he's writing these things out in a way that seems calm, but you can get a sense of the panic of what's happening as you go through.
Yes. And we'll also start seeing a trend here. Like, first he writes, "All safe, we remain on the fist of the first men." Just watch how that progresses. I love this.
Yeah, all right, go ahead and read the next part.
He put that note aside and found another blank parchment. "Still fighting on the fist, amidst heavy snow," he wrote, when someone shouted, They're still coming. Result uncertain. Spears, someone shouted. It must have been Sir Malador, but Sam could not swear to it. Whites attacked us on the fist in the snow, he wrote, but we drove them off with fire. He turned his head. Through the drifting snow, all he could see was the huge fire at the centre of the camp, with mounted men moving restlessly around it. The reserve, he knew, ready to ride down anything that breached the ring wall. They had armed themselves with torches in place of swords and were lighting them in the flames. So, the next sort of little step in the saga of Sam's Note, still fighting. Result uncertain.
I also like
Whites attacked us on the fists. I just love how there's a story in his notes.
but we drove them off the fire. I love how that's optimistic thinking. Like, okay, no, this will work, and you know that it isn't going to work, and so it feels so ironic there. The progression of it is so everybody's calm, but there's real sense of panic going on, much more so than people just losing their heads.
And then we get that little next bit of exteriority of what's going on. Like the riders are moving around and they have torches instead of swords now because, swords don't work as well against the whites as they would have liked.
Yeah, it's a strong mental image as well.
Wildlings. Wildlings be killed with swords, but whites don't really care about swords.
Also helps.
It's also kind of manifesting their anxiety of having, to put down their weapons and use a different weapon to try and get them to stop.
Yeah, and that's the other thing is that they're not idiots, and that helps because if they were idiots, you as a reader would just get kind of annoyed at them. It's always much better when good guys defeat bad guys who are competent, and in this case, the whites feel so dangerous because they are being met by a competent force and are still going to overcome it and defeat them. And so you're like, oh, and again, it's a really nice visual image here. Like, I really got a sense of what this looked like with the big fire and the ring wall and all of that. I mean, again, there's a very good balance of dialogue to visuals to Sam's mental scape, I think, in this chapter.
Outside, inside, and dialogue.
Yeah, exactly.
All coming together in the Holy Trinity.
Well, and yet we still have not even seen one zombie. So, and that's what's so cool about it. Okay, whites all around us, he wrote, and when he heard the shouts from the north face. He wrote when he heard, coming up from north and south at once, spears and swords don't stop them, only fire. Loose, 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 a voice screamed in the night, and another shouted, bloody huge, and a third voice said, a giant, and a fourth insisted, a bear, a bear. I love these. There's such a great progression of the dialogue here. Bloody huge, and a voice said, a giant, and a fourth insisted, a bear, a bear. The fact that he says a bear makes it, there's something about the repetition of that makes it much more powerful and sound like...
Yeah. You can just hear how they're sort of grappling to understand what they're seeing.
Yeah, exactly. And you can tell he's like, oh, fuck, a bear. Like, what the fuck? A horse shrieked, and the hounds began to bay, and there was so much shouting that Sam couldn't make out the voice anymore. He wrote faster, note after note. Dead wildlings and a giant, or maybe a bear, on us, all around. Heard the crash of steel on wood, which could only mean one thing. Whites over the ring wall. I don't know why, I'm getting shivers reading this. There's something so creepy. There's such a sense of panic in him trying to be calm through all of this. It's really great stuff.
Dead wildlings and a giant, maybe a bear. It's he just doesn't... Poor Sam just doesn't know what's going on, but you can just really, I know Martin doesn't write horror, but this scene is horror. It's that creeping, building tension of something coming to get you.
Yes, I read a horror short story he wrote, and some other stuff. And the thing is, Martin is actually very good at writing horror at certain points in this series. Like, he writes epic fantasy, like you said, but there's a lot of horror in it at times. And this is, I think, one of the places where he really shows how much of a master he is at that kind of a thing. Okay. You go ahead and read the next part. Fighting inside the camp.
Fighting inside the camp. A dozen mounted brothers pounded past him towards the east wall, burning brands streaming flames in each rider's hand. Lord Commander Mormont is meeting them with fire. We have won. We are winning. We are holding our own. We are cutting our way free and retreating for the wall. We are trapped on the fist, hard pressed.
I love it. Again, there's an optimism there, like a desperate optimism, and then also this part here, we're trapped on the fist, like it doesn't really make sense.
Yeah. Do you know that passage in The Lord of the Rings where they're in Moria and they find the book?
Drums in the deep.
The same sort of feeling.
Yeah,
it's just doom in it.
Yeah, no, exactly. Like there's just a sense of like, oh, we're cutting away free and we're trapped on the fist, hard pressed.
Mm-hmm. This is exactly the sort of feeling I want to capture in my battle scenes. Like, I love this bit.
Well, the thing is, I love battles, right? Because I'm a military fiction like nerd, but I really like battles that have this kind of an emotion to them. And like it took 3 books to get to this point in terms of build up, and that's kind of the problem. All the best action has a lot of build up, but I love these battles that aren't just like armies meeting, but like a real story with atmosphere in them. I think is really cool.
I do love the Battle of the Blackwater, though.
Oh, that's also an excellent. No, I mean all of his battles are good. Like he routinely does all of them really well. This is just the most horror focused one, I think. One of the Shadow Tower men came staggering out of the darkness to fall at Sam's feet. He crawled within a foot of the fire before he died. Lost, Sam wrote. The battle's lost. We're all lost. Why must he remember the fight at the fist? He didn't want to remember. Not that. He tried to make himself remember his mother, or his little sister Tala, or that girl Gilly at Craster's Keep. So we're back to him now in the present. Again, this is a good place to pause to go, okay, we're going to be back here, and then it's almost like a little bit of a cliffhanger.
Lost. The battle is lost. We are all lost.
Yeah. And then, so again, there's a progression in the way he writes what's going on.
Yeah, that's the end of the story. He started the story with, we're fighting them back, and the story ends with, lost. We are all lost.
Yeah, it's really good stuff. Okay, more of him in the present.
Sam has fallen down. He can't walk anymore. His pack is too heavy. His armor is too heavy, and he's just lying in the snow now, thinking that, this isn't such a bad way to die.
Yeah, exactly. Like he's just given up, and then he gets carried by one of the guys. I don't remember who.
Small Paul.
Right.
Paul.
Who just wants his dagger, I think is what he says. Also, what's funny here is that throughout the books, there's how about the bear and the maiden fair, and because that's kind of been built up as like this, folktale song or whatever. That's I think one of the reasons the bear in this is so horrific is because there's a sense of like almost sad parody, like horrific parody, and that this bear is like an undead horror.
Yeah, and he doesn't want to hear the bear.
Oh, yeah, you're right, exactly, yeah. The bear that had come up the fist had no hair left on its rotted flesh. He didn't want to think about bears. Yeah, that's so funny. Yeah, he actually does say that.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's a nice way that the author has layered on different layers of meaning into his work. Think about your ravens then. They were never mine. They were Lord Commander's ravens, the ravens of the Night Watch. They belonged to Castle. Chet said I could have the old raven, the one that talked. Oh yeah, Small Paul was also in the mutiny.
Yeah, they were kind of using him because Small Paul is a little bit simple.
Yeah, he's a little simple. He's like one of the many very large but simple characters in the books. Somebody said once that in Planetos, which is what they call, Westeros, the planet Westeros is on, like there's an unusually large amount of very tall people. Especially in peasant land where everybody should be malnourished. I was gonna say malnutrition.
Well, it's a bit of that thing where in fantasy, to make a character impactful and monumental, you sort of default to making them tall.
Yeah, exactly. And Martin has said that he
likes. I have found myself doing that too.
Well, I wonder why in your case. Maybe you feel a certain kinship with them.
I just assume that people are, in general, tall.
I wish I had that privilege. Anyway. They're gone, said Sam. I'm sorry, so sorry. They're flying back to the wall now. He had set the beards free when he heard the war horn sound once more, calling the watch to horse. 2 sharp blasts and one long one. That was the call to mount up. But there was no reason to mount, unless to abandon the fist, and that meant the battle was lost. The fear bit him so strong that it was all Sam could do to open the cages. Only as he'd watched the last raven flap up into the snowstorm did he realize they had forgotten to send any of the messages he'd written. It's such a small tragedy, but you really feel it.
It's a pretty massive tragedy, actually, because he's gone through all this labor and all this emotional torment to write these notes, and then he just releases them. Like, this is how you write high stakes on a personal level. Like, he is not fighting, but he had one job, and he's gone through such pains to complete it. And now, by one little error, all that work just goes undone.
Yeah, it's true. That's very much what it is. And it's something where it feels almost like Coen Brother-esque, in that their characters are always kind of fumbling in like these really awful circumstances with small things and small like parodies and tragedies and satires, and so it kind of has that feeling. A little bit. Also, notice that we skipped
a good point from Hope here.
Oh,
I think Martin does that to emphasize the giants were a thing and that some of them commingled with the first men. There is some talk about giants' blood being mixed, especially into the north.
Yeah. No, that's actually, I think, very true. I think it's the cars, not the cars stuff. The Umbers, I think, that are like mentioned as being, they have
the Umber giants.
Yeah,
Great and then, John and Small John Umber.
Yeah, exactly.
But also Hodor. Like, a lot of people comment that Hodor must be mixed with giant's blood.
Yeah, or Tormund. But Tormund has that whole thing about how he's like born from a bear. No, it was he took a bear to. I don't remember his thing now, but he has a thing about bears or giants. Also, notice that we've skipped a lot of the main part of the battle here. Like the middle portion, we've just skipped of like whatever happened on the walls, and we're just getting straight to now everything's falling apart, which is a very economic way of telling the story, which I wish Martin would do more in other places.
Mm-hmm.
You go ahead and read the next part.
No, he squealed. Oh no, no. The snow fell and the horns blowed. Ahoo! 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 They cried, to horse, to horse, to horse. Sam saw ravens perched on the rock and ran after them, but the birds flapped up lazily through the swirling snow in opposite directions. He chased one, his breath puffing out of his nose in thick white clouds, stumbled, and found himself 10 feet from the ring wall. After that, he remembered the dead coming over the stones with arrows in their faces and through their throats. Some were all in ringmail, and some were almost naked. Wildlings, most of them, but a few wore faded blacks. He remembered one of the Shadow Tower men shoving his spear through a white's pale soft belly and out his back, and how the thing staggered right up until the haft and reached out its black hands and twisted the brother's head around until blood came out his mouth. And that was when his blood had let go the first time. He was almost sure.
And so we finally get to actually see the zombies, and because there's been so much buildup, it's really cool. But he also just says the dead. With arrows in their faces and through their throats. And so there's still like a sense a little bit of that you're not getting a good look at them. You just get them in like the snatches of light that there is. And also, this is a nice little vignette of the moment that speaks to what's going on
and,
without having to describe.
The dead is in many ways more painting of a description than the whites, because what are whites? They can be ghostly, they can be physical things, but the dead, we all know what the dead look like. They're sort of rotting. Yeah,
that's actually a good point. And there's also just something very panicky about him referring to them in an abstract form. Martin does that sometimes. He'll abstract out the way he names things. Recalls things to create like a little bit of like an almost epic feeling about it. He did not remember running, but he must have, because the next he knew he was near the fire half a camp away with old Sir Otwin Withers and some archer. How would you pronounce Otwin Withers?
Sir Otten Withers.
Otten Withers. Sir Otten Withers and some archers. Sir Otwin was on his knees in the snow, staring at the chaos around them until a riderless horse came by and kicked him in the face. The archers paid him no mind. They were loosing fire arrows at shadows in the dark. Sam saw one white hit, saw the flames engulf it, but there were a dozen more behind it, and a huge pale shape that must have been the bear, and soon enough the bowman had no arrows. Okay, so one thing is, I need to complain that fire arrows don't really work this way. They're not explosives. For some reason in these books, dead people, like zombie bodies, are like super flammable. And I've never quite understood why. Like, it's freezing. Yeah. They probably have like a rime of frost and snow on them. There's no reason that this should be working.
I would say yes, but also we all know that fire is what kills the whites, so maybe there's some sort of magic reaction.
Okay, that's fair. That could make sense. That makes sense.
Because consistently they sort of just light up like torches. It's not something that happens just here.
Yeah, that's actually a good point. Yeah, they do that consistently. So yeah, maybe it's yes. Something in the magic that comes from them.
So in reality, you're absolutely right. Like if you light a curtain on fire and it just doesn't just go even in a hot room, like.
No, it takes forever. I mean, the reason people use fire arrows is to try to make thatching catch fire, but like it's really difficult actually for that to work. I also just like the line, and soon enough the bowman had no arrows. It's nicely abstracted and kind of creepy because of that. But it's been paired with,
but it also brings in economy. Like archers never have infinite arrows. That's just in movies. They can fire 100 arrows. Like you have a little set, and when you run out, you run out.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also, there's just something like, oh no, we're out of ammo now. Like that's how desperate the situation has become. That they're out.
And I like how he writes, like, they're losing arrows at shadows in the dark. They saw a shape that must be the bear. Like, he's really utilizing that thing where if you hide the thing, it is more scary than if you describe it in every single detail. Notes to take if you want to write horror.
Yeah, no, it's very true. The monster's hidden. And also, this is one sentence. Notice, though, that we have the alternate of we had two short sentences. The archers paid him no mind. They were loosing fire arrows at the shapes in the dark. And then one long one that kind of rolls.
The massive one.
And the thing is, it builds up in power. And because it builds in power, it ends with, and soon the bowman had no arrows, which is more effective than if that was on its own as a sentence. Because, short sentences do have their own impact, but in this case, it builds up into kind of like a lyrical feeling. And then Sam found himself on a horse. It wasn't his own horse, and he never recalled mounting up either. Maybe it was the horse that had smashed Sir Otwin's face in. The horns were still blowing, so he kicked the horse and turned him toward the sound. Again, the sense of Sam being disconnected from what's going on, and that like, something happened, and now he's here.
Yeah, and exactly. He just appears in some place, and suddenly there's a horse, and maybe the horse was the one that smashed Sir Otten's face in, like a completely nonsensical thought, but maybe it was that way. Like, you can just hear his mind sort of grappling.
And reality kind of breaking down. Yeah,
it highlights the chaos, like, it's very good.
Yeah, there's just a ton of that in this chapter. In the midst of
carnage, and he brings in the sound as well. The horn's still blowing.
Oh, yeah, the horn.
Using the senses.
Yeah, and it's interesting because, like, even in sentences like this, it feels cold because he's set that up, even though in this sentence itself, or this paragraph, he doesn't actually mention anything about the cold.
No, but you can just see the breath coming out of the horse's nose.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's one of those things that, like, once you set it up, it's there in the reader's mind, and you only just need to remind them occasionally.
Yes.
In the midst of carnage and chaos and blowing snow, he found Dolores Ed sitting on his garon with a plain black banner on a spear. Sam, Ed said when he saw him, would you wake me, please? I am having this terrible nightmare.
I love Dolores Ed. He's so funny.
Yeah, it's funny because it's a good way of being both funny and, like, the whole thing's creepy. Again, the sense of unreality of what's going on. But it's just a very Ed thing to say. More men were mounting up every moment. The war horns called them back. He just makes an onomatopoeia. They're all over the west wall, my lord. Thorin Smallwood screamed at the old bear as he fought to control his horse. I'll send reserves. Katie would be very annoyed because she does not like onomatopoeias in this way, but I actually think they work.
In these books, I love it. Like, you have to choose what you choose to write out like this, and horns are just as made for this.
Yeah, I think so. And also, it's not a dumb sound. It's not like neigh or like moo. You know what I mean? Like this is a sound that kind of works.
It's something that builds atmosphere because you can just imagine them screaming in the background.
Yeah, exactly.
No swish swish, no swish swish, Val.
Yeah, so
yeah,
for
swish
those...
swish is such a small, inconsequential sound compared to the blaring of war horns. Like, have you heard a Roman horn?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's very different in that way. Okay, you go ahead and read the next part.
No! Mormon had to bellow at the top of his lungs to be heard over the horns. Call them back! We have to cut our way out. He stood up in his stirrups, his black cloak snapping in the wind, the fire shining off his armour. Spearhead, he roared. Form wedge, we ride down the south pace, then east. My lord, the slope's crawling with them. The others are too steep, Mormont said. We have... His Garen screamed and reared and almost threw him as the bear came staggering through the snow. Sam pissed himself all over again. I didn't think I had any more left inside me. The bear was dead, pale and rotting, its fur and skin all sloughed off, and half its right arm burned to the bone, yet still it came on. Only its eyes lived. Bright blue, just as John said. They shone like frozen stars. Thorin Smallwood charged, his longsword shining all orange and red in the light of the fire. His swing nearly took the bear's head off, and then the bear took his. Okay,
so just some great stuff here. His swing near took the bear's head off, and then the bear took his. That's such a fantastic pair.
The turn of phrase. Yeah, the turn of phrase. It is so good.
It's a thing only prose could do. And that's what I really like about Martin's writing sometimes, is he has this like almost... I still can't quite find a good word for it, but there's like a witticism to it. That one thing will lead to another. And I also just like, he charges, but, he does this heroic charge, and then the bear just is like, fuck you.
Yeah, but especially like he near took the bear's head off. That sets it up like, oh, he's successful, and then the bear took his. It just... Like a bear trap, just snaps close.
Yeah, I think that's the thing about it too, is that this is very abstracted, but like you can see it. Like I felt the bear take his head off. Like I can just picture that, which I think is very cool. Only its eyes live. Yeah. That's another example that I really like.
Yes,
it's a strong visual without actually being a visual, which is something a lot of writers can't manage.
Yeah, it's one of those short sentences that sort of only its eyes lived, because it juxtaposes the previous description of the bear. It's rotting, the flesh is sloughing off, and just contrasting them against each other like that just really makes an impact. Like, do contrast in your prose, because it really makes it pop.
And then here, bright blue, just as John said, they shone like frozen stars, then explains what it's like. So you get back to
and frozen stars, like, it's a little bit cheesy, but also you can really picture what they look like.
Yeah, and
like,
also
it serves the purpose.
In the kind of hysterical energy of the scene so far, it really works in context.
Yes, and Sam, obviously, like, a great part of what Sam sees every day is stars, so he'll make that association naturally. It's organic to the character. There's also something you should think of when you're writing characters' reactions to things, like what is natural for them.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's a really good point. Ride, the Lord Commander shouted, wheeling. They were at the gallop by the time they reached the ring. Sam had always been too frightened to jump a horse before, but when the low stone wall loomed up before him, he knew he had no choice. He kicked and closed his eyes and whimpered, and the Garan took him over somehow. The Garen took him over. The rider to his right came crashing down in a tangle of steel and leather and screaming horse flesh, and then the whites were swarming over him, and the wedge was closing up. They plunged down the hillside at a run, through clutching black hands and burning blue eyes and blowing snow. Horses stumbled and rolled. Men were swept from their saddles. Torches spun through the air. Axes and swords hacked at dead flesh. And Samuel Tarly sobbed, clutching desperately to his horse with the strength he never knew he had. So this last part is a thing I think I stole from Martin, because I do this all the time, where I'll have long sentence with thing and thing and thing, and then ends with character thinking a thing or doing a thing. Like, there's a very specific rhythm to it that I tend to also do in my writing. I also love the use of horse flesh, screaming horse flesh, because it's so dehumanizing. But it gives you a sense of like, oh, the horse is now no longer really even looks like a horse, it's fallen down. This is also not how cavalry works, by the way, but whatever.
But they're not really acting as cavalry right now.
I mean, that's true, actually. And also the whites aren't actually that closely spaced, so theoretically they could probably make it through. But yeah, this is just a great description.
Yeah, and let's just say the fire, they have pretty much lit the whole fist of the first men on fire. Like, those horses that want to get out, they will run through bodies to get out.
That's a good point, yeah. That's a good point. The horses are kind of panicking.
Yeah, if there is one thing that trips me up in fantasy books, it's that people just don't understand horses. Like, I'm damaged. I'm an equestrian. I breed horses, for those who don't know. And, you know, the weird horse mechanics in a lot of fantasy, like the horse ran for 3 days straight, and I'm like, no, it's dead.
Yeah, no, they tend to think of them as like motorcycles, and it's like, that's not really how a horse works.
Just insert some oats and the horse will run and run until it runs out, and you put some more oats in.
Or not even, like, it can just eat grass, and that's like not a thing modern non-step horses can really survive off of long term. Because
and how much grass, like, it's the sparse grass you're gonna get, especially like here in the fist. Mm-hmm. There's not going to be any grass. There is no fodder.
I mean, the whole fist just straight up can't happen. There's no way they would actually be able to supply themselves there. But that's
even in the woods, like, there is not that much that is energy rich enough for horses to really sustain them. That is something, like, you have to bring food for the horses. They can make do on fodder, but they will get weaker and weaker and weaker because horses need to eat a lot.
Yeah, the only horses that can really just hang on like that are Mongolian horses, because they're like the steppe horses they would use, because they're not as built. And that was one of the
Icelandic ponies, but also, they have garons, so possibly like Mongolian horses are somewhat like garons. They're small and tough and durable. And not great for cavalry charges in general.
I knew that about Garans as well. So I have to leave in like 2 minutes, but so let's go ahead and just read this last part. He was in the middle of the flying spearhead with brothers on either side, and before and behind him as well. A dog ran with them for a ways, bounding on the snowy slope, in and out among the horses, but it could not keep up. The whites stood their ground and were ridden down and trampled under hoof. Even as they fell, they clutched at swords and stirrups and the legs of passing horses. Sam saw one claw open a Garen's belly with its right hand while it clung to the saddle with its left. Suddenly the trees were all about them, and Sam was splashing through a frozen stream with the sounds of slaughter dwindling behind. He turned, breathless with relief, until a man in black leapt from the brush and yanked him out of the saddle. Who he was, Sam never saw. He was up in an instant and galloping away the next. When he tried to run after the horse, his feet tangled in a root, and he fell on his face and lay weeping like a baby until Dolores Ed found him there. That was his last coherent memory of the fist of the first man. And so I love this image. Sam saw one claw open Garen's belly with its right hand while it clung to the saddle with its left. It's like, the zombies in this are so creepy and swarming. They're
like mummy-esque.
Yeah, they really
from
are.
The Mummy, where they sort of swarm over things. They're like leeches. They just attack and attach themselves to things with their claw hands.
Yeah, it's so creepy. It's really nice how he writes them, because the thing is, zombies are so overplayed, but he kind of breathes new life into them by really focusing on these elements of them that are really creepy.
They're sort of zombies, but also not zombies.
Yeah, they're more like Tyrannid zombies, for Warhammer fans. You'll know what I'm talking about.
They're like necromancers, puppets.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing. Like in John's chapter where the hand is still animated after he cuts it off. That was the moment where you're like, oh yeah, no, this is like a bizarre. This is not a zombie in the way that we understand
No,
it.
this is magic at work.
Yeah, and that makes it like very creepy. That sense of like it just keeps coming at you. It has a mind of its own. I also like that somebody steals his horse. I think that's like kind of a nice touch in terms of like, there is no brotherhood here. There are people who are just like, desperate.
And a lot of the brothers are pretty, not the greatest people. And Sam is right now in their situation. He's kind of a liability, so they just, fuck him.
Yeah, exactly. And like none of them much like him anyway. So, and yeah, that's the chapter keeps going on and is actually quite a good one. But that's it for the Fist of the First Men. And like it's so good. It's so good. It's both a really effective battle and a really effective horror scene.
Indeed.
And it's like the one time we're really going to see the whites on screen. And so, this had to pack a punch, and it really does.
Yeah, we have built this up over 2.5 books, and finally we get to see them. And it's, it's the climax. It's just as good as you hoped it would be.
Yeah, it's
and
so much.
Sam is the perfect character to show this through.
He really is, because he's not heroic, and so like there's you get a sense more of the horror. I can't remember if the TV show showed this battle or not. I don't think they did.
No, they didn't.
Yeah, and like the battle with the wildling at Half Home or Hard Home, I think it was, is like a nice battle, but this is so much creepier than that one. And
they
so
just come and find the remains of the battle, I think, if I remember correctly. And, it's like, at that point, I was like, okay, so, showrunners, you had one of the best scenes in the entire book, and you just decided not to do it, because probably it would be too expensive, like too many actors, too much CGI, but it's just like, blech.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing is, I don't know why they... I don't know, because so much of this I feel like you could shoot this in a way where you don't actually have to use a lot of CGI.
Yeah, you don't need to show the zombies. Yeah, you don't need to show them. You need the bear. The bear is the best part. So just blow your budget on the bear.
Yeah, exactly. Like most of this is Sam inside of a ring wall, not being able to see a thing, and people just shouting things. And like that would be very, that would be very cheap for them to do. So I don't know why they didn't. That's kind of just very much.
I think they just weren't that interested in Sam's arc beyond, Gilly. They're like, oh, this is a love story. Let's do it.
And let's make Sam kind of like a witty person. Like I don't really like Sam in the show. The show, I mean, he's fine, but he's very different than book Sam.
He's very different, yeah.
But so I gotta run. But guys, what do you think of this chapter? Maybe I'll put up a specific thread for the Song of Ice and Fire hour. And what other chapters would you like to see? Let either me or Lindbergh. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, Lindbergh, for aiding and abetting my obsession.
Thank you for inviting me. I have waited for this.
This is what you were born to do.
Like, I have been clutching these books so hard for so long.
That's really funny. Okay, all right. I'll talk to y'all later.